you have the fundamentals, you will always know how to apply them, right? And I go back, and that goes to me, goes back to what we're saying about identity. If you know who you are, you will know what's right, what's not right, and what you have to work on, and you'll find, and you will bring out your natural strength in each situation, and you will apply it, right? So
Adolfo, welcome to the Oxford Talks podcast. I have your resume in front of me today. And so you are a CEO of a company called Gold
gold
Results.
results.
And you are Chief Passion Officer of that. We're going to come to that in a second. You spent 35 years training on martial arts. You've been to Japan as well, fluent in 3 languages, and 5 as well with Portuguese and Japanese as well. And you've sold a company in 2000 as well with, yeah, I think more than 300 people. Tell me what's not on the resume. Let's start with that. For the people who don't know you, apart from this, who are you and what do you do?
Um, so I guess what's not on the resume is I grew up traveling. My dad was a translator, so I grew up. My parents are Spanish, but I grew up everywhere. I lived in North America. I spent time in Asia, and so that kind of childhood has its positives and its negatives. The positive is that you see a whole bunch of exposure to different things. The negative is you always feel you don't have a home. But it did teach me to adapt. And it's funny, I remember my first job, and when the guy said to me, he says, most people resist change. That's your strengths. You adapt to everything, and you actually use it all the time. So that kind of got me thinking of, what kind of paradigms, what kind of things make us rigid, and how does that limit our performance? And that's kind of been, the genesis of everything I've done in my professional career, especially the last 30 years.
So, Chief Passion Officer, tell me more about that.
Well, it's kind of funny because when we used to have paper business cards, I had it. Now I have it on my signature. You'll see it says Chief Operating Officer, and it's got it. Excuse me, Chief Executive Officer. It's got it crossed out, and then it says Chief Passion Officer. And I use this actually to open up conversations with clients and potential clients because I say that's what I believe a CEO should be. Right? Too many people try to control everything. A CEO has to have a really compelling vision, has to motivate people to really engage with it, and then has to create the conditions so that the talent and the brilliance around them can run with it and then get out of the way. That's your job. And so that creates a really interesting starting conversation with a lot of CEOs who are clients because they kind of, well, I didn't think of it that way. And we're known for challenging paradigms and making people think differently. And I think that's the little tweaks that make the big difference.
Adolfo, you have recently done an Oxford talk as well. Congratulations on that. It came out recently and is doing really well. What I really found interesting about you was that it's all. I think this work is already trademarked as well. That there's essentially a formula to performance that your organization tells people, and you have helped numerous people from ATP tennis players to executives all around the world. Tell us about that formula, and then we're gonna get into the nitty gritty of it.
Well, the question that's been driving this for the last 30 years is why do some people apparently have all the natural talent, and I say that in air quotes, and yet they don't fulfill their maximum potential, and others who kind of fly under the radar end up having a lot of success. So I was just obsessed, what is it that top performers do? And as you said, I've worked with professional athletes, ATP tennis players. I then worked with a lot of business executives and big multinationals. And what I found, and I got into the research, I've done a lot of research of, giants like Dr. Anders Ericsson, Deliberate Practice, and, tons of others. And what you end up finding is that people who are elite performers, no matter what, whether they're actors, whether they're business executives, whether they're athletes, they all have a series of things that they do consistently. And so what I tried to do was to model that. And that's the book that came out last year called The Optimal Performance Formula. And what it is it tries to make really actionable a series of key things. And sometimes you say, well, that's so obvious. Yeah, but do you do it? No. Right. And sometimes we that's where we make mistakes. We forget about the basics. As a matter of fact, we live in a world that's so hack driven. You just want to get the result. But I teach people to look at the process. That's what great athletes do. As a matter of fact, they don't look at the scoreboard, right? Because it's irrelevant. You can't control the scoreboard. You can control all the inputs that go into that.
I love that. The closest thing I can remember from essentially it is the hyper attention to detail. and creating a process around those details. I remember, I mean, a very famous example in the world of technology, let's say, or business is Steve Jobs with, being maniacal about the design of things. And it's that attention to detail. How do you create processes? And again, I would love for you to walk me through the formula, because I think one of the first steps is the identification of it. Because if you don't know what things need to be sweating over, then you might be spending 80% of the time, which make 20% of the difference. So I would love for you to give me a kind of a case in point, as in that, for example, let's say for me to grow this podcast, let's take this example. Well, if I come to you, what would be your immediate walking me through the formula?
Okay, so let me answer that and let me link it to your Steve Jobs comment because it's a really good example. So high levels, the book's obviously got a lot, but it's got three big blocks in the performance formula, and I'll run through them in a minute. But it's mindset, maps, and mojo. So if you can think of it like when you're making a product, mindset is the raw material, right? If you don't have good raw material, it doesn't matter what you do, you're not going to have a good product. Maps is the plan to put it together, right? The design. You take those quality raw materials, whether you're a cook or you're building something, right? You have to have a great design. And then what I call mojo is execution. And you've worked with lots of startups. What kills most startups is not having an idea. It's not consistently exceptional execution. And big companies suffer that. And it happens to athletes, it happens to musicians. That's what separates the best from the rest. So when we go back to mindset, the raw material, one of the raw materials for elite performers everywhere is to have a mindset that you're never finished. So I'll give you an example. If you take athletes in any field, right? Kobe Bryant, Tom Brady, Rafa Nadal, it doesn't matter. The best of the best, they have one thing in common. Not when they started, but when they became number one, they doubled down on getting better, right? Now, that if you compare that to the world of business, you get to a certain level, C suite, and you stop improving. You just do what you know how to do. I use the example of driving. When you learn to drive, after you stop running over people, right, you don't get better. You just consolidate that level. And I distinguish between training to expand your skills and training to consolidate. So most people in business stay where they are. Steve Jobs, which you mentioned, one of the things he had was he was always thinking, how can I get better? What else can I learn? How can I cross fertilize, right? That's what great leaders do. They don't sit on their laurels and say, I've had success. It's, okay, I've gotten here. What do I even have to challenge that I've done? And if you look at Steve Jobs, he cannibalized the iPod with the iPhone. But that's a real visionary, right? I'm even going to challenge what I thought was right. Hey, I got a better idea. And so that's one of the things that top performers always have. They're always looking to get better. When I meet CEOs, I challenge them, right? What's your plan to be a better CEO in the next 5 years? And they go, what? And I tell them, if you asked Kobe Bryant when he was all-star, what's your plan to get better? He would have told you, I have to do this and this and this. And he was already the best, right? And the same for everybody else. Rafa Nadal had won 4 or 5 Roland Garros and, most successful Spanish tennis player ever. And he said, yeah, but I really suck on fast surfaces. My serve is bad. I don't volley well. And he wanted to be the best he could be. And that's the difference. Top performers don't look at the scoreboard. They don't know how much they've achieved. They care about what could I potentially do. And that's where Steve Jobs stood out, right? He was like, don't tell me what you want because consumers can only imagine what they know. I'm going to tell you what's possible, right? So that's mindset is so important. And when you look at all the transformations that, companies do, that's the starting point. If you don't have that, first from the leadership team, but then everywhere else down, and people are open to learning, they have to learn, and you understand how people learn. We'll talk about that in a minute. If you don't have that, then it's a real challenge. That to me, so that's the first part of the formula. You have to have the right mindset.
Is that, I'm assuming, that can be acquired, or do you think that some people are born with it?
I believe pretty much every skill can be acquired. And actually, if you look at Dr. Anders Ericsson's work on deliberate practice, which is for me the premium on how people learn elite levels of performance, and he studied musicians, athletes, etc., he discovered not only that the predominant factor in world-class skill development is the number of hours of deliberate practice, but also that practice doesn't unleash hidden skills. It creates skills that did not exist before. And that's a really important thing. So it means it's not people. We're enamored with this false concept that people are born as naturals. And they're not. Natural talent just shows how fast you go up the curve, but that's at the very beginning. Over the long term, that's negated. It's who works harder and in the right way, with the focus, with the attention, etc. Um, and so that's a really important part. And the other one is going back to your podcast question is first thing to get this right and say, okay, so I want to get better. Question is, who are you and who do you want to be? What's your identity? I call it identity, right? If you're a company or an athlete. And that's really important because so when I worked with tennis players, right, I had one tennis player who ended up getting up to the top 10. But he did not have the natural talent that a Roger Federer did, right? He wasn't going to blow you off the court. So we worked a lot about who are you? What makes you unique? And we came up with this metaphor of a gladiator, right? He was incredibly disciplined. He was in great shape and he was consistent. So he played from the baseline. And the goal was you're just going to wear everybody out. You're not going to blow anybody off the court. You're going to wear people out. And once he got that in his head and he stopped trying to be Roger Federer and do those great shots, he got up to top 10, which is a huge success, right? So you have to know who you are because that not only tells you what you have to do, it tells you what you don't do, right? And companies often they chase the last shiny thing, right? The newest thing, and they make mistakes. That's not who you are. Don't forget who you are. And technology now. Everybody wants technology. Well, technology has to be an enabler of where you want to go. It does. You don't necessarily have to take it, right? I mean, IoT a couple of years back, everybody wanted IoT. Well, does that make sense for who you want to be? So I think identity is exceptionally important, and then everything else gets structured onto that. So this is who I want to be. Then what does the best look like in who I want to be? And I'm going to be humble, and I'm going to start looking for ways to improve that. And if you're an organization, right? So what skills do I have, and what skills am I missing? So for your podcast, I would say, I know you're a really talented guy. You got a lot of skills. What things don't you have, and where do you find the world class partners to work with you to bring those skills?
I would love that. I think, Adolfo, I would love for you to be a guide for people who are in that phase of discovering that mindset. We'll talk about the mindset and all of those things in a second. What does one person do in any given that they want to excel at their career, they want to excel at sports, or if they're an athlete, or even if they're a business leader, they're just starting out, or they have just heard your work, they've just seen your work. How did that mind shift happens? Are there tools or hacks to that?
Well, I think again, the first thing is, who are you? I mean, there's tools that I work with people to sort of figure out what is it that lights you up, right? And then everything in society is structured to take you down a fixed path, right? So school isn't actually there to develop your unique talent. It's to try and find and select people who are going to work into the system, right? And you're trained a certain way. So that makes it really hard for people to step out, right? So the question is, who do I want to be? And even if it's impossible, right? I have a saying that it's even on my email. Possible just means nobody's done it yet, right? And that's what the greats do. They say, okay, so nobody's done it. Why? Could I do it? How much could? And then you start working towards that. So it's who do I really want to be? And don't limit yourself with what you know. Say, okay, if I could get there, what would that look like? And then you start thinking of all the pieces you're missing. And that's where mindset comes in again, right? So you say, wow, I'm so imperfect, right? And instead of getting depressed or ashamed of that, you go, wow, I have so much room to grow, right? And that I find especially executives, C-suite, struggle a lot with it, right? They don't want to admit that they're wrong or that they don't know something. They feel they have to know the answers, right? But that just limits them, right? There's nothing better than a leader who comes in and goes, "I'm working on myself on doing this," and then inspires people to do it. It's work in progress. You never finish. And actually, going back to the science, deliberate practice shows that there is no top. The more you practice, the gains are more incremental, but you can always get better. And I think that attitude that opens you up to feedback, right? That's part of the mindset too. You have to seek and crave feedback, right? Athletes love feedback. They really do. Executives hate it. They absolutely hate it. They feel it's an attack and an insult and whatever. Athletes love it. If you are not giving them something they don't know, they look for somebody else. I don't want you to tell me how good I am. I know what I know how to do. I want to know how to do what I don't know how to do, right? And that's the difference in mindset, right? So you need to take your ego and hang it on the coat rack. That's the first thing, and not worry about the scoreboard, right? Yannick Sinner, who just lost the U.S. Open to Carlos Alcaraz a few weeks ago, said something I thought was really mature. He said, "I'm too predictable as a player. I need to go out and try different things, and I'll probably lose a lot of matches now, but that's okay. It's not about winning matches. It's about becoming better." And that's a
Here's the
really big
mindset.
thing.
Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
it's mindset. It's what are you focusing on, right? In my Oxford talk, I talk about it, right? There's a different, if you focus on achievement, on getting the trophies, getting the wins, getting the corner office, right? It's a dopamine cycle. But it's very, very limited. Whereas if you're focusing on becoming, how can I become better, right? There's no limits to that. And success comes from, did I improve? Did I learn something, right? It's not about, did I win? That's just it's a scoreboard, right? It just tells me, it's data. It tells me if I'm on track or not, right? And so data is not good or bad. It actually tells you how you're performing at that moment versus where you want to be. But it's not a personal attack. So companies struggle with that so much, feedback loops and stuff. I'm not telling you you're bad. I'm telling you how to be better, right? That mindset helps a lot. So if you have an organization that really understands that, then the sky's the limit, because feedback is not a political tool they use to hurt each other. It's something they use to prop each other up. And oh, yeah, that's a great idea. I hadn't thought of that. And then
Yeah.
that's where the magic occurs.
I would love for to Adolfo. I would love for you to take me an example. So let's say I'm moving on to the next step. Let's say, okay, I know what I need to do. At any given point, let's say, even just take the example of the podcast. For let's say, for example, of for a second, executives. I think I have of the belief that the goals are always changing in life. The ambitions are always changing. What you want to do, maybe if you are Roger Bannister,
Yeah.
which I know you love, you want to be the first person to break that record. That has never been done before. So I feel the goals are have that capability to be, something which is really out there. I'm of the opinion that reaching any goal, perhaps in this life, especially for humans, the nitty gritty processes are literally all the way back to what I don't know. It's the same process that maybe Roger Bannister has used that is still applicable to what you have to do. But we somehow get lost in the process that maybe if am I building the next $100 billion AI company, I might have to come up with processes that are just new. Do you think my hypothesis is true, or do you think this is false?
So I think you hit on something really important, which is the second block of the performance formula, which is maps. So when you want to do something really ambitious, it's going to take a long time. Okay. Nobody is great in a week or a month. Nobody in any field. So that's a fallacy, right? So you have to think in decades, right? You have to. So that's the first thing that's very different from most people, right? I'm going to build myself over the next decade. And then you have to say you need what I call a map. It's right. What does great look like? And the reason that's so important is because, especially if you're early on in your journey, so let's say I want to be a basketball player, right? And I say, well, what does great look like? So I got Michael Jordan, I've got whatever as my references, right? 1 year in, I'm going to be so far off. It's really depressing, right? The question is, am I on track? What should I look like 1 year in, right? And how long is it? It's going to take me 8 years to get here. What's 1 year in look like? And am I on track? So the map, and you were saying about building your podcast, right? There are so many pieces. You have to have clear what that's like. Find experts who can tell you, this is how the growth occurs, and then make sure you track that, and you stay focused on what you have to stay focused on, and that map will help you, because you go back to it and you go, oh, I've done this, but I neglected this, right? So I don't know when I grew the following, but I neglected updating technology, because that's one of the things I identified. To have the greatest podcast, my technology has to be constantly evolving, right? Okay, well, now I know I have to focus on that. And it happens to all of us, right? We all do that, right? And it's why it's so hard to have balance in life, right? Because you focus on your career, and your family life is stressed, and you focus, and then you focus on both of those, and then your health, because you don't have time to work out. And so it's hard to find that balance, but that's what great performers do. And they're constantly finding where they're weak, and just, okay, I'm going to put my finger there. And the great thing is, it's not, when I find something weak, I don't get upset about it. I don't feel stupid. I just feel, oh, it's great. I found something. And then I have something to work on. And I'm a beginner on it. And then I get obsessed with finding people who know more than I do about that. Right. So the ego's on the coat rack. And I find a deep, deep expert, somebody who's done this for 30 years, this one little thing. And then I try and deem, what can I learn from them? So the map is extremely important, because it keeps you on track, right? And it tells you where you are. And it allows you, for an organization, allows you to communicate. So if you see transformations, a ridiculous percentage of transformations in corporations fail. And the reason is because there's no map. There's no, how am I going to get you there, right? And you should be here in a week. So I go back to how people learn. I made a reference to this before. We don't have in our minds at all so change is where I want to go. Transition is, how do I get people there, right? So Any skill, physical or cognitive, requires practice and requires failure, right? By definition. But the first time you did anything, you were not as good as you could be now. For sure, you or anybody, right? But we seem to forget that. So we do this 1 day training on whatever skill, right? Psychological safety or coaching. And then we throw people back to the work and they're supposed to be great. Well, it's like if I had a morning with you and I teach you how to serve like an ATP pro, but then you don't practice. And you go, hey, my serve's not getting better. Of course not, because you're not practicing, right? You would get that. Yet in companies, we don't understand it, right? And so when you make this map, you need to embed what I call training reps, right? You need to say, okay, I want the organization, I need new skills, I need innovation. So I'm going to play a place where people have a safe place to do something new, not be good at it, because it's okay, and get feedback so they can become better at it, right?
Speaking of feedback, when does an individual, a company, or anyone for that matter of fact, that when does a feedback is something that you should onboard, and when is something the feedback that you should discard? Because if I'm Thomas Edison, which I'm not, but someone has told me, or let's say take a popular example of Ford, people want better horses, people want all of that, no one wants the motor car. If I had listened to that feedback, the world would never have vehicles, and I mean, so many other things. When is where's the fine line between perseverance versus stupidity?
So I think it's in what the definition of feedback is, right? Feedback has to be actionable and identify a way to improve. So to say that's impossible, those are naysayers. Those are people who are scared, right? So don't confuse people's fears that they project onto you with feedback. Now, feedback is if you come in and you say, "Hey, look, I've been doing podcasts for a long time, and when you come on, you should really be more focused on this or this or this." Okay, that's feedback. It's positive, right? I may feel, oh, gee, I thought I was better, but it gives me something to do. That's impossible, or, oh, you're such a dreamer, does nothing, right? So that's how you separate feedback. And you should always listen, evaluate it, and then you don't have to adopt it. I'm not saying everybody is right, right? But it's really healthy for you to say, is what I believe true, right? I do this exercise with a lot of companies. So we'll go in and they're stuck on something and do a session with the team, and you'll hear stuff like, oh, this is impossible because it's impossible because, right? Okay, and so then I'll say, great, but you're not letting yourself see further. So what if it were possible? No, it's impossible. Well, okay, what would need to be true, even if you think it's impossible? What would need to be true for this to be? I'll give you an example. I had a client in the restaurant business, right? In hospitality, they had big restaurants and bars and stuff. And the restaurants worked really well, and the bars didn't, right? And they complained a lot because the bar personnel, it was at night, and a lot of spillage, and they were just, it's a pain in the ass, not responsible. No way we can make this work, right? So and so I asked that question, and it took a couple of times. What would have to happen, even if you think it's impossible, to make this change? And then one guy started joking, and he said, "Well, we should get them to pay us instead of paying them." And I said, "Wait a minute, that's a really good idea. So what if instead of having employees, you rented out space to little entrepreneurs? They own their own P&L, right? You've got a fixed income. You give them the traffic because you've got the restaurants, right? And then they're responsible for that." And they said,
Mm.
"I never thought of that." So all of a sudden, we've opened a possibility that you never thought of, right? But that's a real important thing. It's just getting you to think of, and maybe that worked. That actually worked well, but it doesn't mean the solution may not work. But you start looking at things you never looked at, and then I think it was Wayne Dyer who said, "When you change the way you look at things, the things you look at change, right? And you
I love
focus
that.
on different things." And so that's really important. And we are programmed to believe a certain series of things, right? I talk a lot about failure. The way I view failure and the way most people view it is really different. And I work with my athletes that failure is just data, and it means you're doing the reps and you're stepping out of your comfort zone, and that's fine. And then there's no problem with it. No, emotional baggage with it. Whereas most people see failure because society tells you, and then you've got this stamp, and then you've got to, undo it, and like, right. So challenge the paradigms that you've been heard, which is what Roger Bannister did, right? No, it's impossible. Okay, but I'm going to try. Maybe it's impossible. I'm going to try. Oh, look at that. Maybe it's not. And as soon as and it's in the talk. As soon as he did it, like 9 other runners in the next 18 months did it, right? That means that somebody changed your benchmark of what's possible, right? So I'm always very cautious because, we look at what we knew. We knew the world was flat. There wasn't a question, right? The wall was flat. Women shouldn't vote. Apartheid was, a whole bunch of things that you look at now and you go, my God, that's insane. How did we, because we weren't, and then people challenged our thinking, and now the new norm. So don't think you're at the end of the road, right? AI is changing the way we think about things. Technology has changed the way what we think is possible. So I think it's really healthy and that's why I try and find something that makes me feel like a beginner every year, right? Because I feel clumsy, and I realize that I have to challenge all my assumptions, and that's what kills so many people. They're so trapped by their assumptions. It's like the stories of the elephant, right? A baby elephant is tied to a post, right, with a little, and so he can't break free. When they grow up, right, they tie them to the same post, and they could pull it out, but they don't because they've accepted the limitation. And as human beings, that's a lesson to be aware of.
Oh, I love that example. I think it just reminds me of what you just said. I think it reminds me of the story of Edmund Hillary as well. I think people don't realize that the fear he probably had to overcome that. I think maybe 100, people had tried before. And I haven't read his story thoroughly, but anecdotally, I've heard that as him and Tenzing, his Sherpa, they were climbing up. They were watching the dead bodies of other people who couldn't be there, and after a certain point, there were no dead bodies, and it's just so remarkable. And I think physical endeavors they certainly have their place. I think, but even these times that we're living in, the mental barriers that people have are the Everest that you have to climb physically. That might look quite a lot, but they are Mount Everest in people's brain that they just can never climb it, and it just feels monumental, and there's no Tenzing sometimes to help you there.
Yeah, exactly. And as a matter of fact, the third block of the performance formula is you've got your plan, but then you have to go day to day and you have to test it and you have to learn, right? So it's mojo, it's execution, right? And that execution is I'm going to try, and I'm going to try different things, and I'm going to see what works, and I'm going to feed myself back, and it's a constant
Tell
loop,
me, why
right?
did you call it Mojo? What?
Well, it was obviously with the M's, but in tennis, I remember there was, it was when a player would get loose and he would start getting into flow. They say he's found his mojo, and
Yeah.
and I think that's where great performers, entrepreneurs, companies, whatever, is when they get in their mojo. So if you study the science of flow, there's actually a neurochemical cocktail that gets you there. What it does is your cognitive thinking, your critic, your mental critic is inhibited, right? And creativity skyrockets, production skyrockets because you're not questioning yourself, right? And because you're in flow. And that's, to me, mojo is that. It's okay, so I'm going to try something, but I'm going to try it if it works. Oh, it didn't work. I'm not stupid. I don't care. Okay, next, right? It's almost, you're not emotional about it, right? People say to me, I have a really thick skin. I just don't give it any importance. But it's not that I try and block it. No, it doesn't matter. It's not important to me, right? It's about where do I want to go. So whether I fail 1 or 50 times, or you're talking about Edison, or 1,000 times, he said, I've just found 1,000 ways that don't work, right? I haven't failed. So I'm just knocking off, and that's where consistency comes in. So I think people who become great at something, be it a physical endeavor or a cognitive endeavor, right? And again, you go back to Steve Jobs, have just thought or worked on one thing much more than the average. And that goes back to deliberate practice. It's thousands and thousands and thousands of hours. And so you stand out, right? And Steve Jobs thought about the same problem more than any other human being. And so you eventually come up with ideas. And I often say, I've thought about performance for 30 years, talked about, studied it and whatever, and just stuff just finally becomes obvious, right? So I'm not smarter than anybody else. I just looked at it more, and just somebody else, you've thought much more about social media and podcasting than I do, and you've come up with things because intelligent people sort of find stuff and then they formulate. And the key is that, right? So it's most people don't put in the work to do it, right?
Dolph, I have a question for you. One thing I constantly face the dilemma of is the issue of focus. Um, because you look at what the modern world is today, you pop up someone's profile. I mean, I look at your resume and it's like you're fluent in 3, 5 languages. Have you done martial arts? Da, 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 da. So when and again, so you look at it like world leaders like Elon Musk is running SpaceX and this company and that company, and somehow they're integrated and all of that. And then there's on the other cohort, there are people like Steve Jobs of the world who are just focused on one thing and just been doing that for last 20 years. Is it possible? Of course, there are nuances to that, but sometimes when you're focused on something, at least for me, it pops up in my head that I'm losing out on other things because, at least for us, I'm of the opinion that the world that I'm in of technology and media, like there are technology windows that open up after certain time in life and then they close. For example, if I start opening up the window of, let's say, NFTs, which was a thing. It still is. It's not a thing anymore. Like no one sort of deals with that. If I start, okay, let me get into smartphones now. That window is very much closed. It's a highly, highly saturated market. AI is that window which is open now. I think in next 10 years there will be quantum computing is another window that's going to get opened up. So if I'm just focused on what I'm doing right now, I might miss those windows. How does one deal? And I'm pretty sure a lot of executives deal with that okay, they might just be focused on one thing, and but they're like, oh, but this is the hot and shiny thing of the day. How do you balance between those two?
Two parts to that answer. So one is going back to what I said about identity. Depending on who you are, those different opportunities will be relevant or not relevant for you, or more or less relevant, right? So you have to
And when you say identity, is literally a sketch of myself in my head,
of
and
who you want to be, right?
I
What?
can just say it in one sentence, this is who I want to be, and I could just
Yeah.
fixate on that.
So my identity is I am the go-to for helping elite performers drive optimal performance, right? So that's my obsession, and it's been that for the last 30 years. So what stuff do I look into? Well, when I see stuff around developments in neurochemistry, I get into that because I know it gives me knowledge to help people, right? AI, up until now, it hasn't been for me something. AI at the stage it is at now doesn't help. It substitutes and stuff and some productivity, but it's marginal, right? So I choose my battles because you do have to focus on something to be consistent, right? And that's where the maps come in. You can program that and say, okay, so these two dimensions is what I'm going to focus on for the next 6 months, right? And I still got the other ones, and then I'll come back to them, right? But so you can't. So focus is like energy, right? In physics, right? So a woman's high heel really hurts, right? Why? Because all that weight is focused on a small point. The smaller the point, the more power. If that same woman goes barefoot and steps on your foot, it doesn't hurt as much because it's dispersed. Well, mental energy is the same. When you're really focused on one thing, it gives you power. When you're dispersed, it's like pushing on a wall. And that's how martial arts masters break bricks, right? They focus all the energy in one place. And great performers do that. They focus on one thing. Musicians, they practice, classical violins. They practice one part of the piece, not the whole piece, one part of the piece, boom, 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 and then the next one, and then they string them together, right? I talk often about breaking performance into the component pieces, we're optimizing each one, and then stringing them back together. So in that sense, the broader map is, what does great look like? And I know I'm far off in all these areas, but I'm going to focus on these two. And as new opportunities come, and you can modify that, right? All of a sudden, the new technologies come out. Wow, that's really relevant for what I'm doing. So I'm gonna take some effort off this and put it here, right? But you have to keep enough effort and enough focus that you have power. Otherwise, multitasking is a myth. You can't actually literally multitask. You can alternate. You can't count to 10 and do the ABCs at the same time. You can
Yeah.
you can do 1A, 2B, right? You're switching back and forth very quickly, right? But you can't simultaneously do it, right? And you can actually only have one thought at a time, right? So if you understand that, you choose what that is, and there's a cost of switching. Multitasking there's a connection disconnection cost, right? So I try and focus on something long enough. It's like writing. Writers have certain blocks. I was just seeing Stephen Kotler was saying, anywhere from 2 to 4 hours is kind of the sweet spot for you to get enough rhythm and focus to get really good and not burn yourself out, right? So 2 to 4 blocks of 2 4 hours, but that has to be long enough. You can't do 5 minutes and do a great session of writing, right? It's the same thing. So for me, I need to work on something. Maybe it's 3 months, 6 months. I don't know, depending on what I'm working on. A year, and I'm going to give myself a year to do that, right? And you keep your lookout, right? But and that will, and sometimes you'll miss stuff. That's okay, right? It's okay. You just have to be on the lookout of, wow, this is really relevant for who I am. Would this really help me, or is it just something? Do I just not want to miss out because everybody else is talking about it,
I
right?
love that. It's just so hard to practice. It's I know. I think for a lot of people, I think even in the companies, I think they And a lot of big companies have this kind of inertia of things. This is how, and there was a time in my life when I worked at TED, and that I certainly felt that that company carried that inertia. There was that initial push. Okay, we're gonna make the brand go global, and they took that. I mean, you listen to their stories. Chris Anderson and the guys who were working at that point in time, and they were like, it was such a hard thing to open up the brand to the world. Imagine there are like TEDx events all around the world, and it's just not. It's you're just giving away your brand. But now, at least it's my personal opinion, they took that decision and it was hugely successful, and now they're just running that decision like this. There was no. It's been two almost decades, and there hasn't been that next leap of courage. Okay, we're gonna do this now. It's still the same, and I think that's just one example that I can immediately think of. Um, Adolfo, let's talk about you. We have been. You have been practicing martial arts for 35 years. Tell me about your time in Japan.
So Japan was a wonderful. So when I went to Japan, I was already a black belt in 3 styles, and this is kind of the mindset I was talking about. So I said, but I want to go to the Mecca. I want to go to Japan and see if I can compete because being successful in what I was doing. But I said I want to go with the best of the best. So just up and went one between my last and the second last years in university. I took a sabbatical, and I went to Japan, and I went to study with a famous master who was up in the Tohoku region. A famous, he was a direct student of the founder of Aikido, and I went up there, and we would train 4 hours a day from 6 to 10 in the morning every day. Teach languages later to finance myself. Um, and it was just a wonderful experience. It taught me so much. And actually, I always talk about one of the most important lessons in my life I learned there. Because I would go every day, and he would show us stuff, and then I'd go home and I'd write it down. And the next day, same thing, and I'd write it down. And then after like a couple of weeks, it was just every day would seem so different to me. And I said, "Look, master, I'm trying to, document what you're doing and understand it, but I can't keep up." And he said to me, "Oh, finally." And I said, "What?" He says, "Well, that's where I wanted you to get." He says, "Learn and forget, learn and forget." It took me years to understand it. What
Learn
he
and forget.
what he meant was you practice the specifics, and what you learn is the underlying principle, and you forget the specifics because that changes, right? You have to learn and then forget the situational, learn the basics, and then you'll be able to apply that. And I never forgot that. And that's actually where society suffers so much. We want to be able to do one thing, but we don't understand the basics underlying it. We do shortcuts. That's why so many organizations have the weak links because we're in such a rush. Working the fundamentals is one of the most important skills. It's boring. It's not sexy. But if you look at the great athletes again, right? Roger Federer was a guy, like, greatest tennis player ever, right? He would work his footwork like nobody. Everybody thought, oh, he's a natural mover. No, no, no. He was the hardest worker on footwork. Footwork is so boring, right? Great boxers work their footwork. Nobody, others want to punch and stuff. He work his footwork because footwork gets you there. And in tennis, hitting the ball isn't the hard part; it's receiving it. What I mean is, there's micro adjustments, right? The ball's coming so fast, and the better you move, and the better visually you anticipate that, the more position you are. That's why he never looked like he was running for the ball because he was so great, so smooth at moving, and he had such great vision that he would position himself, and he was always hitting it properly. Whereas other players who were great players but would always get there running like Rafa Nadal or whatever, right? Because he worked these fundamentals, and people don't realize that. And actually, when you're really great in something, people don't even see that. You work on stuff it's below people's radar. They don't even see it, right? It's just so fundamental. So that's important to understand in whatever craft is working on your fundamentals. So this is what the
I
sensei
love
was
that.
telling me. He was, don't worry about winning or being able to do this throw or doing this. It's about understand what's underneath. What is it you're doing with your body that gives you the strength and the power? How do you channel it? It's not even the technique, right? And it was, there's a series of principles in Aikido, and it's like from the center and rooting, and so he says, once you understand that, you can then adapt them in any situation. If you only learn to do technique 22, right, and and the guy's wrist isn't like this, it's like this, you're excuse the expression, you're screwed, right? He didn't say that, but that was the idea. But if you have the fundamentals, you will always know how to apply them, right? And I go back, and that goes back to what we are saying about identity. If you know who you are, you will know what's right, what's not right, and what you have to work on, and you will bring out your natural strength in each situation. and you'll apply it, right? So
Adolfo, yeah, I love your ability to what you said so far. I think the top level has hit me super easily. Like it's so easy, it's mindset, and I love that you've laid it out in a very kind of a structured path. And I do understand the kind of a gravity of it. Like as you sort of the lesson you learned that it's the identity of it, but when you decide who you want to be, that's the hardest part. And again, once you've decided, you let go of it and you just work on the other thing. And so that I'm really loving the conversation we're having, that on the top level, what you need to do immediately, this is the simplest sort of way, 3 steps and you're there. Again, the hard, maybe it will take years and lives and decades to actually hone those parts. um
but that's the most beautiful part. When I remember my first class in martial arts, and I thought, and then
is this in Japan or this is?
no, this was actually, I was living in Canada at the time. I was 14, and I felt like it was something I'd done in another life. Like I don't usually,
Yeah.
think in those terms, but I just felt like at home, right? And I knew I wasn't skilled, but I knew I would. It's something you would always be getting better at, and something intuitively seemed attracted to me about that. And I'm, 35 years later, still training, and I use it to sort of keep myself honest, right? So I'll look, and I had an operation on an inguinal hernia, and it screwed up some of my fascia. So my flexibility, wasn't what it should be. And so I said, okay, this is a great chance to be a beginner. And so I went out and I sought out somebody who is an incredible expert in flexibility, a lady named Donna Flagg. She is a former professional dancer, professional dance teacher. She forgets more about flexibility than most of us have ever known. And so I thought I was really good at this, right? Because I've been doing martial arts for years. And she totally challenged everything I knew and took me to a whole new level. That was a wonderful reminder of, even if you think you're really good at something, you can find someone who can teach you stuff. So that was the other thing, that martial arts has been fundamental at for who I am. And this is a part of what I package and teach people, right? The great martial artists, they don't do it again for the score. They do it because of who you become, right? It's a path, and that's what great entrepreneurs do it. I'm not a big fan of Elon Musk and his political positions lately, but he does say some things in terms of an entrepreneur. He's a really smart guy, and he had one phrase where he says, if you really believe in something, think it's important, even if you think there's a high rate of failure, you should do it, right? And that's exactly right. That's what top performers do. This is
Yeah.
important. It's part of who I am. It's a contribution. I'm here to do this, and I'm going to try it, even if it's not clear, even if I think it's risky, whatever, right? And so you're not doing it for the fame. That comes. That's just a byproduct. Um, our society has a lot of quirks around that, right? So
Yeah.
you have social media. You see people. You try and compare yourselves to them. You have to go fast. Yeah, and that just totally throws people off, right? You have to know who you are, and there's stuff I just go like, no, I don't. I've recently made the decision that I won't go speaking in the U.S. right now, but just because of who I am and what's happening there, and I just don't believe it, and that's fine. And people were like, "Wow, you should be careful with that." It's who I am. It's not a political statement. It's a human statement about
It's
human
your
rights.
identity. Yeah.
Yeah, and that's who I am, exactly, and whoever doesn't like that, well, that's not the right person for me to work with, right? And I hope enough people align with that, right? But I think you have to be who you are, because the cost of not being who you are is really wears you down, right? It's cognitive dissonance, right? The concept of cognitive dissonance is acting in a way that you don't believe is who you are.
That's so profound. I want to take you back to executives because that's where a lot of work is. Um, how in the world of business, and I come from that world, and I've been operating businesses. So this is my September actually marks the 9th year of my officially first starting the work. I used to help my mother before, so technically it's been like almost 10, 15 years. I just been my whole family had been in the family of entrepreneurs. One thing I think over the last sort of 3, 4, 5 years, I've realized that again, I used to be a huge fan of Elon Musk. Again, minus the political part. Again, the technology part of the things he has done. I mean, catching a rocket in space. I mean, all of that. That's just an incredible feat of engineering. In the world of business, I tend to notice this thing that um, when when the time comes to decide on a goal, and again, for the people who don't run businesses, I don't know if was really going to make sense to them. But the goals is not something like you start the most businesses start because you want to make money, and there's might be a problem. You have a problem that you really deeply care about, and there's some economic opportunity around that, and you start with that. I highly doubt a startup founder starts a business saying that this is going to be $1 billion company and that's my North Star. And they every decision is towards that arbitrary number. But as the money, as the sort of kind of businesses progresses, and we're certainly seeing in our kind of a my world that we're slowly transitioning from, like, let's say, a small business to kind of a medium business. And now, or and if in government's official tax terms, we are a medium business, so we are paying higher rate tax. But we more of stuff I'm beginning to realize, like, there are forces around me. I get messages 10 times a day about, like, why should I move my I how I should move my company to Dubai and Cyprus and all of that. And I just say no to that. And it becomes more arbitrary, and it's all more fixated to numbers. When we are trying to get, let's say, a new CRM tool, the thing, and it just always bugs me, they ask me the question, who is it being used by? Is it just you, 1 to 10 people? Like, it's numbers, it's 10 to 50 people, 100, 200, and they categorize it. And I think you, as an executive, you get into that mindset that those numbers are it. So you'd never start with a $1 billion company, and but the more you are kind of in business, and the more you, okay, I need to have 10 people doing this, and it all becomes numbers. How one keeps true to themselves, to their identity, when numbers are all you're just going to get measured by.
Well, that exactly. You just took it out, the words out of my mouth. It goes back to identity, right? Who am I, right? And so there's certain things that are on vogue, right? Growth. You have to constantly be growing, right? Whatever. You have to be in this sector. You have to do this, right? And that may be okay, but may not be who you want to be. Right? Our company has grown a lot in the last couple of years, and sometimes I'll just stop it and I'll say, "We're not doing this project." And they're like, "Yeah, but it's profitable." I don't care. It's not who we are. We don't do that kind of project. And it's not that they're bad projects, right? It's not unethical. It's just the client and the conditions don't allow me to create a real impact. And we live off our reputation, right? My company lives off, you can call, it's on our website. Everybody we work on gives us testimonials. You can call any of them and they will say, "Oh, yeah, these guys are unique," right? That's what I live off. And if I can't produce that in a client, it's not the right client for me. Uh,
Adolfo, I'm going to throw a quick curveball at you. Executives, big companies, they do carry inertia. And I think if you're saying you are a big company as well at the moment, how, and it's the identity, identity moves from one thing to another. When it is the next thing you want to work on, how do you rally people behind you? Like, we said no to this, we're going to do this now.
Identity never changes. Strategy does, and tactics do, right? But identity, who I am, will not change. How I get there may change.
But
So
wouldn't you be stuck in who you are if your identity doesn't change?
no, I mean, who I am. So I am the reference in helping people drive performance. How I do that, is it one-to-one coaching? Is it using AI? Is it whatever? That may change as situations in the world change, right? But always is, will this bring me closer to what I want to do, which is have a positive impact on people, right? And if the answer is no, we won't do it, right? So there's projects that come to us which are economically profitable, right? But it doesn't further my mission. It doesn't help me make an impact and teach people how to do things that they thought was impossible. So I'm not interested in it.
So there are layers of identity, actually. There's one which just never changed,
Hmm.
and the other is more of a strategy.
Yeah. So as you evolve and mature, that there's different facets of that, right?
Okay.
And that's where we go back to business. You were saying, so people know how to, business managers. Well, first of all, there's a difference between manager and a leader. Okay. So management is about producing replicable, consistent outputs. So you want predictability and you want it to be the same. So making widgets and at the same cost, and you want that. And that's fine, but that's not leadership. Leadership is the contrary. It's, how do I innovate? How do I go beyond what's possible? How do I motivate people? So those are two sets of skills that people kind of equate, and that's why they struggle. So for management, we know how to do it, right? It's easy to measure, right? It's cost, it's time, it's productivity, right? What we don't know how to measure is leadership, right? Which is innovation, it's culture, it's
It's very arbitrary. There's
yeah,
no numbers to it. Yeah.
yeah. So because we don't know, people don't manage it, right? So they just measure the other stuff. But it's like going to gym, right? That fuzzy stuff. You go to the gym and you don't see, a week later you don't see results. A month later you don't really see results. But you're working under the surface, right? If you're doing it right, then it'll come out. companies aren't, and shareholders don't know how to see that in many cases, right? There are some who've been great at it. So Jeff Bezos was great at it, right? He lost money for years and years and years and years, but he had it clear what he was building. He's like, don't worry, it's going to come. And it, obviously look at him, right? And Elon Musk is the same thing. The great thing about Elon Musk is he's, and I say this lovingly, he's crazy. So he doesn't give a shit about what anybody says, right? So he's not influenced by that. No, that's the wrong thing to. I don't care. I'm going to do this because I believe in it, right? And he's a visionary, and he does stuff that's really high risk for other people because he sees it as that foundational work, and then it ends up, being positive for him. So you need to understand what's the foundational work I have to do, and you don't always have to measure. You just have to know, does it take me closer to where I am, even if nobody else can see it, right? Is that taking me there? And that's what really makes a difference. And that is how you rally people around it, right? Because people always know you're always being true to who you are, right? When we turn down a project, sometimes I get, some of the people who have the profit share in our business, right, get a little upset, right? But I'm like, but they ultimately go back and go, but we are who we are, and nobody can say, we ever sold out. And that is worth so much more than money. You can't buy that.
Are there any tools and tricks to rally people when I'm having the, like, for example, I'm imagining me being in that meeting and as an observer. You are saying that we're not going to do this project. Three members of your team are saying that we're going to do. What do you do in that kind of a boardroom? Do you cast a vote, or do you what's the way?
Well, ideally, it's let's just go to data. Convince me. Convince me how this will help us further our mission. And if you can convince me, okay, I'll change my opinion. But I can't see it, and I'll tell you why I think it hurts us. And if they can convince me, I will. I have no problem with it, right? Usually, it ends up with, okay, you're right. It doesn't further it, but it gives us money, right? But
Mm.
money is not a mission, right? And actually, Simon Sinek said this really, really well, right? It's a consequence. It's a consequence of having a really great, creating extreme value through a really good mission, right? A really valuable mission. It's a dashboard. It's a measure, right? People are willing to pay you for that, right? It's like when clients say to me, "Oh, that's really expensive," right? It's what it's worth, right? What expensive and cheap is just relative, right? When I'm discussing a new project with a client, sometimes they'll say, "So how much does this cost?" And I go, "Oh, did you decide you want it?" And they're like, "No." And then I'm like, "Well, then why are we talking about money?" Right? It's ridiculous, right? Uh, is a Toyota expensive or not? Is a Ferrari expensive or not? Depends on what you want it for, right? Is healthcare expensive or not? So it's relative to the value. So let's understand if this is right for you, and if it is, we'll talk about cost, and then it should be a no-brainer, right? And if I can't create so much value, and it doesn't have to always be quantified, right? That you don't see it, then you shouldn't be buying with me, right? And that's just a great way to do business, right? I never apologize to anybody or give them rebates or whatever because I may invest, say, okay, let's do a first project so you can get to know it. But because I really believe that what we do creates a huge value, and I have the background on that, and it's okay. And if you don't want, I'll say to clients, I understand you go with somebody else. And usually, if it's clear, if I've done my job properly and I've really understood and brought them something unique, they'll say, okay, no, this is what I want to do, right? Because people make decisions viscerally, right? You later rationally try and justify it. But really, you say, I want this, right? And that's what executives have to want, right? Not let's be safe and make sure the shareholders are happy. Is wouldn't this really be great if we could do this, right? And that's what gets people involved. And so that's in those rooms when we're having that conversation. That's what I ask, right? Are you excited about this? Will you tell people? Will you tell a story about this project? No, you won't, right? But what we will about this one, right? And we share those and what we achieve, and then that's the benchmark, right? Would we be proud telling the story to people?
I want to take you to Japan again. What are other lessons that you observed there, you picked up from there that have stuck with you throughout your life?
So obviously the Japanese are a great example of consistency, and they just chip away, chip away, chip away, and consistency does amazing things. Um, you know, their the way they see the production, right, which comes from Deming, but they took it to the next level. Um, Obviously, is about constantly questioning, right? No ego, right? So a lot of things we talked about are personified in the Japanese society, right? And that's why they've been so successful. Obviously, there's some extremes in terms of how they sacrifice so much of their lives for country.
Simply a simplest of kind of task. I mean, again, you see it in movies. Something. It's quite interesting that this conversation somehow pops up in podcasts again. I remember this is our 23rd episode, and I think I've talked about Japan maybe like at least in 7 or 8 of them. It's a constant theme of like, I think even a modern day organizations, you see a lot of them, their mission statements and how they operate. There is some element of how they sort of organize the company. I think the values they pick up from there. Um, yeah, that's
Well, Jap- Japan historically, the samurai were value driven, right? And you sacrifice even your life for honor, right? It was about I live with honor or it's not worth it. That's identity, right? It's who I am, and I'm willing. Who was it? I think it was Martin Luther King said, "You until you found something you're willing to die for, you haven't learned how to live," right? And I think in our society, we're far too apathetic, and we just kind of want to survive and be at sort of that middle ground. But life is about the fringes. It's about
yeah.
being passionate about something, about caring enough to bet everything on something.
And also, in being in this conversation, it occurs to me that you're a man who has seen a lot of things and done a lot of things, and there's a lot that you have figured out in life, or like there are hacks to life that you figured out. What are the things you have failed at?
Woo, a lot. But again, failure for me is not a disgrace. But I've made a lot of money. I lost a lot of money, and then I made it back. So I learned that the money wasn't the valuable thing. It was my capacity to create. I learned that playing to not lose is a losing strategy. So when I made a lot of money the first time, I was worried about keeping it, and that made me lose it. And when I stopped worrying about making money, I made a hell of a lot more. I just started saying how I could create value. So it's not about the scoreboard; it's about the fundamentals, right? And that's what brings you the energy to get up and do stuff. Is am I doing something that is really important to me and it really makes a difference? The other thing I've learned is that ethics and value are not something that you do when it's just convenient. And if you look at our society nowadays and the political situation we've got, that's actually really worrisome because people are afraid to stand up for what they deep down know is right because they're kind of scared. And I think I always have a rule. It's any decision I make, I assume that my son is watching me or could see me, and then would he be proud of what I'm doing? And you'd be amazed what a great filter that is.
Do you tell these values to your kids as well?
Oh yeah. Well, I mean, my son's very small; he's 6. But one of the things that the teacher tells me at school is when he does something wrong, he never gets upset or embarrassed. I said, "That's right, because that's what we've taught him. And he shouldn't. That making mistakes is good. It means he's doing something he doesn't know how to do, and he'll get better." And she's just totally shocked with that, right? I said, "Oh, that's really neat. Well, that's the way you should teach, right?"
Are you coaching the teacher now? Like this is how you should be doing with
Well,
kids.
yeah, sometimes the teacher we had last year was a really great guy, and he would call me a lot, and he asked me to pass on the Oxford talk. Right? He said, "I love your ideas, and I think we should bring them into education." So I think it's about just not being. We have all these things about we have to appear, and people think, and right. It's just about who do you want to be, and then respecting each other. Right? There's so much noise now about if you think this or do this or don't do this or what. Right? It's you respect people's past because success is absolutely subjective, right?
Yes.
What is success? It's absolutely subjective. For one person, could be living in the country and not having hassles, and that's okay, right? We tend to think. I remember a good friend of mine from my graduate degree at Yale, and he went into banking. And then one day we talked years later, and he said, so many successful people are not happy. And I said, how can you be successful if you're not happy? And he said, well, I mean, people who made a lot of money. And I said, well, that's the trap, right?
It's like society tells you, yeah.
Exactly. So, and I decided many years ago that nobody was going to tell me what happiness, and I remember must be about 20 some years ago, and I had sold my company, and then a good friend I had offered me a really good role in a very prestigious bank, and it was a high profile role, and he said to me, and
And
he
this
really
was in Spain, or
yeah, and
eh,
he really cared for me, and he said, "Look, you've been an entrepreneur, but you're gonna be out of the circuit now if you don't get into a high profile an executive job again." So he offered me this really great job leading up, a division of and I turned it down, and he couldn't understand it, and he was like, "Yeah, you're throwing your life away." I said, "It's just not me. It's just not who I am." And it's true, I had a lot of volatility after that. I had good and bad points, but it was my unique path, and that's what I have to do. And I wish education would teach kids that. right? To just follow your, because what is the right path? Nobody knows, right? But you just have to explore, and you have to crash into walls and just figure out who you are. People I hire in our company are very um, eccentric in certain sense, right? We have one guy I love. I met him, and he lives in a van, and he didn't finish university. It was a really bright guy, could have, but he didn't, and he went off to Norway or something, just to explore. And he lives when he works at us, lives in a van. Sometimes, where are you? I'm in Croatia this week. But he's a brilliant guy, right? And I love that he was so different, right? So I said, "Hey, you want to try this?" And he's never. He said, "I don't know anything about it." I said, "Yeah, okay, but I think you could be good at it." And he's fantastic at it. So it's finding people, and that's leadership, right? It's finding and bringing out things that you see in people that they don't even know they have, right? But to do that, you have to then be able to say, okay, it's not the same path, and you're going to do it this way, and you're going to do it this way, right? So it's showing them things that work, giving them tools, but then also helping them find their own strength and their own way to do it and what feels comfortable for them.
Yeah. And also, life passes by, and then we do so many things, but it's the limitation of death that certainly brings that element of focus to what we do. Um, what is that one thing that you want your loved ones and the people you helped across through your life? Again, there's so many things that you might have helped them, but what is that one thing you hope that when you're long gone, they just remember that?
I would hope that people remember me as somebody who was incredibly passionate and who always fought for what he thought was important, the people he loved, and the ideas he thought were important, right? Whether it was popular or not. And actually, I always remember something I read. I think it was in a book of Robin Sharma many years ago, and he said, "Evaluate every decision from your deathbed." And that's a really sobering exercise, right? So you're thinking, do I stand up to my boss or to this toxic team member within the organization, or will my job be at risk? And you say, well, when you go to, when you're on your deathbed, what will make you feel prouder? And then the decision's absolutely clear, right? And we tend to get into these what I call mental hemorrhaging, right? You start thinking of things, and then you say, "Oh well, and then maybe I'll get in trouble, and then I'll lose my job, and then I won't find another job, and I'll lose my house," and you just bleed out in this hypothetical thing. But like if you look at Edgar Tolle, right, The Power of Now. No, but what problem do you have now, right? And most of that will probably never happen, right? So you end up worrying about things that never happen. Mark Twain had a great phrase. He says, "I've had lots of problems in my life, and some were even real." Right?
I love that. I'm gonna take borrow that from you. That is so true for modern times. That's so true.
And it's structured into our society, right? It's if you look at Mario Rubio, the Marco Rubio, excuse me, the Secretary of State of the U.S. He's threatening students that if they step out of line, they will, one tweet, they won't be get their visas
Yes,
and stuff, right? It's trying to control people, right? I mean, that's just the opposite of anything that creates anything positive, right? So it's don't think ahead. Don't do anything creative. You might get in trouble. So how do you grow as a person, right? I mean, don't hurt anybody, don't be immoral, but you have to, say what you express, and have an opinion, and actually be open to changing your opinion as you evolve, right? So I think, we create a lot of, I won't get in. Well, you'll find something else, right? Doesn't matter,
yes.
right?
Life is long and
Like,
short at the same time, but yeah.
yeah, and most of the problem, I mean, if you think back of a problem you had 5, 10, 15 years ago, and which seemed huge at the time, right? You break up with somebody or whatever, you had a challenge or you were in a career change. And at that time, it seemed like huge. And now, do you even think about it? Most of the times, no, you don't even think
That's so
about it.
true. I was the other day I was speaking to my mom, and I was telling about like, oh, we are doing this with business and we're starting these things, and suddenly the conversation led to me starting, and yeah, because it was September, I was just telling her, oh, it's almost 9 years now. And suddenly the train of problems came to my mind, and I think I shared it in a previous episode with Alex that it took us 2 years to just get off the ground, purely because there was a legal hassle with not a hassle, but university that I was working with, Oxford Brooks. They were like, oh, what are you going to do with this, or how you have supposed to be doing things. And now, I mean, we do things at the pace of like days and minutes, but it took years, as in you can't do anything before this is up, and that just took 2 years. And it was a huge problem, but I just don't even remember now. Like,
And that goes back to fundamentals, right? That reminds me of a quote when I was listening to you. Picasso, story of Picasso. And a lady comes up to him and she asks, could you draw something for me when he was already famous? So he does this little drawing and he signs it and he says, lady, take care of that because that's worth at least $10,000. That was many years ago. And she says, $10,000 for 5 minutes? And he says, no, $10,000 for the 40 years it took me to learn to do that in 5 minutes, right? So
Yes.
it's what you were saying. Those 2 years weren't wasted. They were what you needed to now be able to do things in minutes and days, right? That's about working the fundamentals.
That's
Really important.
beautiful. And also, we have this beautiful tradition at the end of the pod. We ask you what has been that piece of literature, media, movie, anything that has one of the most profound. You mentioned a lot of books today as well, so I
Yeah.
assume you read a lot of books as well. What is that one thing that you want to share with people that you think they definitely should take a look at, and this is going to help change their life?
Wow, there are so many books
You have to
that yeah,
pick only one
yeah,
because we are giving out these books. So I already have a huge order to place up, so I don't want to add 20 other to it.
right. Well, I can't tell my own, right? I can't mention my own.
I mean, for the viewers, I'm raising this book. This Adolfo has kindly given me a signed copy. I'll definitely be reading out and sharing insights. But you can buy this from Amazon, I guess.
Yeah, it's Amazon. Yeah.
And is there an audible version of it as well available?
Yes, there's an ebook version. No, there's an ebook version and a print copy. There's not an audiobook yet.
But yes, you can't tell about. But any book that you have not written.
So I think, wow, I think one of the most impactful books I ever read was A Man in Search of Meaning.
Viktor Frankl.
Yes.
That's so beautiful.
It's a harsh book because, of course, the reality of what he talks about, which, by the way, is very relevant with what's going on now in different places. But the key message, which was nothing has any meaning except the meaning you give it, because that's what he basically decided. And that when I read that book, it took me back to my childhood. So when I was young, my parents had an elderly couple who were friends who had been Holocaust survivors, and I never forgot. They both had Mark had been in the same concentration camp, and they were so different. So he was just this loving man who loved life and happy and positive, and she was bitter and had been scarred by what had happened. And I asked him one day, I was very young, and I said, how did you maintain this optimism? Whereas, this obviously, and I understand her, I wasn't criticism, but she's obviously been scarred and couldn't get over it. And he said something which is what rang the bell when I read Viktor Frankl was he said, look, I thought I've seen the worst things that I could ever, anybody could ever see. I seen my family killed. I seen atrocities. At one point, I thought, if I change who I am, they've won, and I wasn't going to let them win. And I thought that was so profound. And he says, and you always have that power. And that's basically what Viktor Frankl says, right? In any given situation, you have the power to give it the meaning you want and to let it change you however you want. So I always give that advice to people in relationships, right? They break up and I say, look, somebody can have betrayed you, can have hurt you. But if you change who you are as a result, then they've won. You've let them really affect you. If not, right, you just keep being you. And a lot of times my wife says, you're so stupid. You trust people. And I said, yeah, because I don't do it for them. I do it for me, right? It's who I am, and nobody's going to change who I am because I like that. So that would be one of the most profound pieces and one of the most valuable pieces of literature I've ever seen.
For that has been it's been so beautiful. It's been such a beautiful conversation. I think I learned a lot. I think I grew a lot in last an hour or so that we've been talking. Adolfo, what's the best way to people to connect with you?
Well, you can find me on LinkedIn. You can go on our website. It's goldresults.com, www.gold-results.com, or my personal website, which is gomezsanchezofficial.com, which is my speaking website. Yeah, that's the best way. You can find the book on Amazon and reach out. And I love to have conversations with anybody, even if they just, want ideas and thoughts on stuff.
Thank you so much for being in conversation today.
Thank you for having me.